Good evening and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Love Bay family, we're rising out of the ashes together. Our topic on tonight is Beautiful Ashes. We have with us our co-host Jennifer Peterkin, and our guest for the evening is Shelly Edwards Jorgensen, author of Beautiful Ashes. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for our guest or co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. If you have any resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, your local organization, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. With that, Jen, would you like to greet our listeners for this evening?
Yes, good evening, everyone. So happy to be back on Suffering in Silence. I apologize. I'm a little, my brain is a bit everywhere tonight. I just got back from Kenya last night and I am pretty jet lagged, but I'm really excited to be on tonight and to be a part of this interview with Shelly. So, my name is Jen Peterkin. For first-time listeners, I am one of the co-hosts on Suffering in Silence. I became a domestic violence advocate after experiencing my own issues with domestic violence inside my marriage. I'm currently working on a project called The Human Experience, which is a blog and soon-to-be podcast about how our stories shape who we are. They shape our perspectives and our values. If you'd like to follow along with that, please give me a follow on Instagram. My username is getthehx, or visit my website, getthehx.com.
Thank you, Jen. And I am so looking forward to your podcast. I really can't wait for it. Shelly, would you like to greet our listeners on this evening?
Sure. Thank you, Minister Tia and Jen, for having me on the show tonight. I'm just excited to be here and to talk to you guys. Like you mentioned, I did just publish my book, Beautiful Ashes, and basically it's available on Amazon or anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Draft to Digital, Kobo, all these other places that you probably never heard of. So... it's been a long journey, and I'm just excited to be able to share my story in an effort to help people find hope in adversity.
Thank you so much. So listeners, as usual, we want to start with sharing some resources. First, we have the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. Their website is loveisrespect.org. Their phone number is 1-866-331-9474. In the UK, we have the National Domestic Abuse Helpline. Their website is nationaldahelpline.org.uk. Their phone number is 080820000247. Or you can visit Women's Aid, AID. Their website is womensaid.org.uk. And then we have the Asia Foundation, and their website is asiafoundation.org. So again, listeners, our topic on tonight, Beautiful Ashes. So Shelly, I just want to go right to you and just ask you if you would just please tell us about Beautiful Ashes, and also if you could, as you're talking to us, tell us about the title, what Beautiful Ashes means to you.
Okay. Well, it's a long story because it starts off describing my mother's murder, really, because I grew up in domestic violence with a father who was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde alcoholic. And when I was 15 years old, it escalated to murder. And so it kind of sets the stage for my whole life. And the story starts in my teens, but there's kind of flashbacks to historical events, and things went from bad to worse to much better. And it was a long journey for me to get to where I am today, which is happy and whole. But I had to find a path to healing, and so I wanted to take people through the journey and see that there's a path to healing. And so Beautiful Ashes kind of is derived from a scripture in Isaiah where it talks about beauty from ashes. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I got the title of Beautiful Ashes. And it also ties to the event. My dad actually, when he murdered my mother, he set fire to our house to cover it up. So that's a big part of my story is that. And so that's how the title was derived.
Okay. So I know what your book is about. I know your story because I've read it. But if you could tell our listeners, more about your story, like what you want to share, what you want the listeners to hear and know about Beautiful Ashes.
Yeah. So basically, one of the things about being a child survivor of domestic violence is I think that there's a lot of people that are survivors of being victims themselves, but I don't know that there's a lot of people out there like me who, unless they became a victim themselves as an adult in an intimate partner relationship of abuse, that really talk about the impact that the children have. And so one of the things is that I've always heard people say is, well, the child is too young, or they don't know what's going on. And so I wanted people to know that, yeah, you do know. There's a story in the book where my sister and I were dropped off at my grandparents' house for the weekend because my parents had a social event to go to. And when my parents came to pick us up a couple days later, I was 4 years old at the time, and my mom had a black eye. And she lied about how she got that black eye. She said that she had fallen down the stairs. But my 4-year-old self knew that was a lie. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, I began to be afraid. And so then, and I might have been afraid before that unconsciously, but consciously I had put the pieces of the puzzle together that my mom didn't get a black eye from falling down the stairs. She got a black eye from my father, and it's not safe. Mm. And then that pattern was continually repeated my whole childhood. And my sister and I would intervene in the fights. We would physically stop my dad from trying to kill my mom. He would threaten to kill all of us. He would threaten to kill all of us and burn the house down. And things just continued to escalate because the drinking got worse as I got older too. And about a month before my parents' 25th wedding anniversary, my dad followed through with the threat that I remember him starting. The first time I remember him threatening to kill us and burn the house down, I was 6 years old. And, when I got to be probably 10, my mom and my sister and I would retreat to their bedroom after fights. And my mom would say, well, I can get a divorce and leave. Well, at that time, this is at 10 years old. That was 1980 for me. At that point in society, there wasn't a lot of divorcees, and I only had one friend who had divorced parents, and in abuse becomes such your normal. You don't know any different, so you don't know. As a child, you don't know that it's wrong, and you almost assume, or you do assume, that everybody lives like this. And so I remember my sister and my sister's 2 years older than me, begging my mom, no, mom, please don't get a divorce. We will protect you. And then she would say, well, one of these days you're not going to be here and he's going to kill me. Well, heck, that's what happened. And so the day of the fire, what had happened is my sister had gotten into some trouble at school. And she ended up getting arrested with some girls because they went to a convenience store and shoplifted beer. Well, 17-year-olds can't buy beer. So, my dad was working the afternoon shift at the time. And so he was the one called to the police station to pick my sister up. And so he felt like, because my sister wasn't actually the one who stole anything, she just was with them and driving the car, and that the police had punished her enough. And so he dropped her back off at school, or sent her back to school in the afternoon. And I had heard all these rumors at school that day that my sister had gotten arrested, but I never talked to her. So she stayed for basketball practice after school, and I went home on the bus. And when I got home on the bus, my dad was standing in the kitchen in his bathrobe, drunk. His favorite drink was a Manhattan. And so I'm like, oh, this isn't good. He was supposed to be getting ready for work. He's making meatloaf, which was normal for him to kind of make dinner before he left, because my mom worked, and my sister and I were so involved in sports. And so I went upstairs to avoid my dad, and I called my mom to arrange for carpooling for basketball practice, because I had to go to basketball practice in a little while. My practice was after my sister's. Hers was right after school. So I called my mom at work to arrange practice, carpool, and she asked me if my dad had left for work yet. I wish I would have said no, but I said yes, he's home. And I wish I would have said no, he's not home. And but so she asked to talk to him. So, I called down to my dad in the kitchen, and he picked up the phone. And I decided that I better at least eavesdrop. I wish I would have stayed on the other line in the bedroom. But I hung up the phone upstairs, and I came to the hallway outside the kitchen, and I eavesdropped on the conversation. And I could tell, my dad proceeds to tell my mom what happened with my sister. And as any parent would be, they would be very angry that their child is arrested.
Yeah.
So my mom I can tell that my mom is getting upset with my sister. But the odd thing is my dad was getting mad at my mom for getting mad. And so that was the first indicator that there's a problem. And so he proceeds to get angry because I think he was afraid that my mom was going to say something to my sister before they could sit down and talk about it together. Because he said to my mom, well, I promise, don't say anything to Lisa. I promised her that we would sit down and talk about this together. So I had seen this escalation so many times in my life that I knew that there was a risk. So he hangs up the phone with my mom, and my ride is late. And so I'm hiding upstairs so I don't have to interface with my dad, who was actually crying about what he did wrong as a parent. I mean, the list could go on, but I said nothing. So, my next thing you know, I hear the garage door open, and I'm like, oh crap. My mom must have hung up immediately and left work to come home because she didn't work that close to our house. So I run downstairs. I knew instinctively that I had to create a diversion. That's how familiar these situations were for me. Mm-hmm. So I grabbed my geometry book. My mom is usually the one that would help me with homework, and she comes walking in the door. I mean, literally, she wasn't even in the kitchen. There's a hallway between our garage door and the kitchen, but she wasn't even in the kitchen. I met her coming in the kitchen. My dad is sitting at a built-in desk still in his bathrobe drinking another Manhattan. And my mom's first words were, well, if I knew you were going to still be home, I could have taken you to practice. And so I create this fake diversion about needing help on my math homework just to read the situation between my parents. So literally, my mom and I sit down at the kitchen table, which is a mere feet from the desk, and my parents say nothing to each other. So she's helping me with this fictitious math problem, and my ride gets there. And again, we're late. I'm also assuming that my sister, who had my grandma's car, was going to be home any minute. So I assess the situation with my parents. They haven't even talked to each other, really. There's been nothing said. And my sister should be home any minute. So my ride comes. I decide, okay, it's safe for me to leave. So I leave, give my mom a hug and a kiss, and say, I love you, and run out the front door. Next thing you know, the neighbors my sister didn't come home. She stayed for her practice. And the neighbors are there to pick us up because there's a fire at our house. And it turns out that my mom was dead. And I mean, it's really a lengthy story, but I knew it immediately. But at the same time, I didn't want to believe it. Mm-hmm. And basically I wanted to believe my dad's lies about what happened, because, you know, even though my dad was abusive, he could be loving. And so I lived with this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, the guy that would let me ride on his back while swimming underwater playing Shamu when I was a child, and the guy that would threaten to kill us and strangle my mother or rip her tongue out or whatever else he would do. And those events didn't happen every day, but they happened enough that you walked on eggshells. You didn't know what the trigger, what would trigger it. And so I still loved my dad. And so I wanted to believe him, even though I knew from the beginning he did this.
Wow. I want to... That was so much. Wow. I want to kind of reiterate some of the things that you said. Maybe just touch on what stood out to me. What I clearly heard was that you were in an abusive household, and your sister and yourself as children were the protectors of your mother from babies practically. You were protective of your mother, actually physically stood in, as children, 10, 11, 12 years old, through the time that you were teenagers, to physically protect her. And you had grown so accustomed to the dynamic of your home where you could read the situations. As you said, you could read the situations well enough to know, once you assessed what was happening and what was going on, that you were able to create diversions when necessary. I think what I want to point out is just the weight that you had to have felt on your shoulders, you and your sister, the weight of a child, protecting your mother's life, physically protecting your mother, coming up with situations to protect her, divert attention, your father's attention away. And I would think seemingly somewhere in there trying to actually be a child also, trying to have your moments where you can play and be free, where you can play basketball, where you can, be with your sister and be with your neighborhood friends. I just, the weight of that is just unexplainable. Just unexplainable, that weight that's on children. I would ask if you could speak to that to our listeners as a child, because we have victims and some survivors who are still dealing with minor children who are maybe looking at their own situations right now. But if you maybe could give a voice to those children and what they're seeing and what they're hearing, because too many people say they don't know. They're only 4, they're only 5, they're only 10, they don't know. So could you speak to that aspect of how they do know?
For sure they know. And the unspoken thing is that abuse, even if and in my mom's case, in my particular case, 99% of the physical abuse was on my mother. The other larger percent, the 1% was on my sister, and it was negligible physical abuse on me. Mentally, it's all abusive. I'm hearing my dad call my mom a myriad of horrible things, and the threats, and he did threaten us all, and he did lay hands on all of us every once in a while, but what happens, and I didn't realize this happened until I went through my own process of healing, is that as a child, you're self-centric. That's just the psychology of children. Is everything is about you. So you plant the seeds that you're not lovable because of this situation. And so there's so many things. And then the other thing is, and I talk about this in the book, is I call them the morning after breakfast. So Friday night or Saturday night or whatever, my dad would literally try to strangle my mother or rip her tongue out or whatever he did. And we physically would separate him. And, and the situation would dissipate. And then the next morning you're waking up and there's freshly made hash browns and eggs and sausage and toast. Mm-hmm. And we're having this morning after breakfast. Well, you don't say a damn thing. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to talk about your feelings. You're not allowed to talk about what happened. It's like, it's just ignored and you move on. Well, as a child, you don't learn what's safe. You don't learn what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And you don't learn how to value your own feelings or fears or emotions at all. So my coping mechanism for dealing with all that became numbing everything. I just numbed everything. But along the way, I planted these seeds of, oh, Shelly, you're not lovable. And then, it was reinforced every single time I was in these violent actions. Is there's got to be something wrong with me. If dad's gonna behave this way, then there's something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. So that's a kind of an underlying factor that, yes. And like I said, I knew at 4 years old, even though my mom didn't say, yeah, your dad punched me in the face, even though I didn't even witness it, mm-hmm. I knew that that's what happened. And so do not think that your children do not know. And do not think that they're not walking on eggshells the same amount, if not more than you. Because when you're even younger, you don't even know what the hell the trigger is. You don't know that it's tied to alcohol or whatever the trigger is for that abuser. And it's so erratic because sometimes dad could be drunk and there would be no explosion. But sometimes there would be. And who knew exactly what the trigger was. And so as a child, you can't always know. I mean, even as a victim, you know that you can't even always know.
Right.
And so yeah, there is a weight. There is this, this fear constantly that you live with. But even further, when it sets you up, it steals your voice. Just like as a woman that's caught in domestic violence, your voice is stolen. Well, as a child, your voice is stolen too, to the point that it sets you up for further abuse. It sets you up to fall into a pattern of abusive relationships. Fortunately for me, I didn't do that, but I became a victim of predators. So I ended up getting molested. I ended up getting raped twice. I became a victim in other ways because predators know who's going to talk and who's not going to talk. And I was trained not to talk. And so there's a pattern that just propagates through your whole life, and you're kind of set up at a disadvantage as a child, starting in domestic abuse, because that's abuse to the child too. And so I had to heal from all of that trauma, and I'm fortunate. I'm the anomaly here. My sister hasn't healed from any of this, and she's 2 years older than me. I'm 52 years old. And it took until I was in my mid-30s to find the right trauma therapy that could even actually help me. And not everybody has the resources for the tens of thousands of dollars that I did spend on therapy to mitigate all this trauma. So there's a need for a lot of change. And but the weight of the situation, if you as a victim yourself are scared and unsettled and feel unsafe, your child feels that way too. And probably even more so because it's more confusing to them, and they're powerless to change the situation. They're children. They can't choose to leave.
Yes.
They don't have that choice. And the other thing is that's their parent usually. So they love that person. So they're, like I said, after my dad murdered my mother, I mean, literally on the drive home from the high school, I knew, before I even knew my mother was dead, I knew she was dead, and I knew my dad had killed her. My sister and I had to live with him for another 2.5 years before his trial. I had to prevent him from killing my sister after that. That's a whole nother part of the story. We became orphans because of this. And at the same time, I still love my father.
Yes.
I hate what he did. I have now forgiven him for what he did. But I never stopped loving my dad. And so, I'm sure anybody who has removed themselves from domestic violence and that abuser becomes their ex, they no longer love that person, but a child still does.
Yes. Shelly, thank you so much.
There's a difference.
Yes. Thank you so much, Shelly, for sharing with us. Jen, I want to give you the floor for any questions or comments.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I just really appreciate how how well you have encapsulated the complications of domestic violence. I mean, all of the seeming contradictions that is domestic violence. And you're right, it is a completely different relationship between parent and child. Domestic violence only exists in a power vacuum, but that relationship between parent and child is directly that's built in, right? Like that is the relationship. The parent is always going to be the more powerful in that relationship. There is a thought out there that people should not leave, or are hesitant to leave their situation when they have children, because of how it might affect the children. And first of all, I mean, I want to disclaimer this by saying that everybody's decisions are valid, and you don't know how complicated and difficult it is until you're in it. But can you just speak to that? Speak to the idea that breaking up a family may be the worst thing that you could do?
Yeah, well, I totally understand that, from an outsider looking in, it seems like, oh, that's an easy decision. If he hits me, boom, I'm gone. No, it doesn't work that way. It's so much more complicated. There's so many layers to it, and again, my parents were married in 1960 and my mom's murder was in 1985. Divorce in that time period was not common. And my mom used to say, I don't want to be the first divorce in the family. Okay, well, you became the first murder. So which is better? And so I know, there's so many factors and everyone has to make the decision for themselves. But I would say 100 times over that it is better for the child if you leave, even if you have to start from scratch again, because as long as you can meet the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of food and shelter, everything else is unnecessary. I mean, there's studies that show that a baby can go longer without food than it can without love. Mm. And a child that's in this environment, it never feels safe. And so even though you have to break up the home in order for that to happen, that's, in my opinion, still much, much, much better for the child. And there's not the stigma around divorce anymore, like there used to be. So, but it's by no means easy to do.
No, not at all. And, it's there, like you said, there are so many layers to leaving a situation, to staying and to leaving. There is nothing more complicated than being involved in a domestic violence situation. You are emotionally attached, but you're also physically attached. You're financially attached. I mean, every aspect of your life is involved in this decision. So it's unlike most other things in life in that you cannot remove complication from that. So by no means do I want to make it seem like it's an easy decision, but there is it's important that children feel safe, right? And so yes. I think that's ultimately what we're trying to establish.
Yes. Well, Love Baby, you want to follow up, Shelly?
No, I just said I totally agree. And again, the whole complicated thing is there's no one size fits all solution.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and even though I would advocate for leaving for the children and not staying for the children, but there's such a broad range of what the abuse is. And so it really is an individual situation, and every single situation is unique. And it needs to be prayerful, it needs to be thought about, it needs to be considered about what's the best for everybody involved.
Yes. Thank you so much. Love Bay, we want to welcome you again to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, with a replay on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. Also on Thursday and Fridays at 1 p.m. Love Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Just a couple more resources we would like to share. From the Virgin Islands, we have the Women's Coalition of St. Croix and Christian-led Virgin Islands. Their website is wcstx.org. We have the Puerto Rico Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Their website is PAZPARAMUJER.org. The New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their website is N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, CADV.org. And also the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their website is N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, CSAP.org. Shelley, I would ask you, thinking about your own experience, what would you say, or how would you encourage teenagers today who may be living in a household of domestic violence? What would you say to a teenager in this situation present day?
Well, I would say, first of all, even though you don't believe me, it's not about you. And it's not about your mother or your father, whoever's being abused. It's about the abuser. The abuser is the one with the problem. You aren't the one with the problem, and you aren't the one causing the problem. And if you're afraid of the change, the change of divorce is a lot better than the change of becoming an orphan. And devastating your entire existence. And, you know, if you're afraid of speaking up, your feelings are valid. If it's your father that's abusing your mother, talk to your mother at least about your feelings. You know, if you don't, you know, for me, it was about keeping this facade. I mean, I lived in this upscale suburban. I mean, we lived in a very custom-built home that my dad physically built himself, and then he burned it down. And you know, so we lived in a very affluent neighborhood. We had a cottage. The last family vacation we took was a month-long trip to the UK. So it's not like we were hurting financially. So this happens in all walks of life. It's not discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
And so and as a teenager, don't think you're the only one. Just because people aren't talking about it doesn't mean it's not happening. And you know, if you don't feel safe, then talk to somebody about it.
Thank you.
So,
Jen, you want to follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And I think you've also already touched on the fact that this behavior being normalized for you as a child opened you up to being vulnerable to other people, to other predators. And so I would just add too that, talking about this stuff is important, because hopefully, especially by you saying, like, you're not alone, you're not the only buddy that's going through this, even though it feels like it. Hopefully that message is received, and that's something, as we continue to talk more about domestic violence and teen violence and all of it, hopefully that's a message that's received and taken to heart, and that some people can start their healing early and don't have to experience all of it before they don't have to hit rock bottom necessarily to start healing their trauma and feeling whole again. I do. So with your healing journey, I mean, we talk a lot about healing on this show. And we talk a lot about how healing isn't linear. It's not, a walking up a single staircase and getting to the top and you've arrived, right? So can you just talk about, I know that's a very large question, so take it wherever you want, but can you talk about healing and how it's a very zigzagged and weird road to walk down?
It certainly is. It is definitely not linear. And the other thing that I think that people don't talk about as much is there is no one size fits all method for healing, and everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. But I'll tell you a little bit about mine. So I told you that in addition to my mom being murdered and our house being burned down, so I lost every worldly possession, my mother, I had to testify for the prosecution for my dad's trial. I was molested and raped. I started having medical issues in high school, and I was an athlete. That was my outlet, so that was another trauma for me. Then people came in and stole everything from my sister and I as orphans. And so I had all this trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And so finally, when I was in college, which is a miracle that I even had enough fortitude to get there, and I started therapy. So I went to a therapist on campus, and I started doing talk therapy on and off for mostly on, but I couldn't always afford it because I'm on my own, right? I don't have any parents. I don't have a home. I have nothing. And so I started talk therapy, and it helped some, but I ended up graduating with my degree in engineering. I moved back to Detroit. I got my dream job with Ford because I wanted to work for Ford. And he bought a house. I had my own house. I was living with my best friend and single. And I just finished my MBA in my mid-30s, and I was miserable. I had no reason to be miserable. I had my dream career, master's degree education, everything from the outside looked great, but I was miserable still because I hadn't finished processing everything. I even was active in my own faith, but I had a fundamental trust issue with God because of everything that happened. Mm-hmm. And so in my mid-30s, I found a different therapist that did different trauma methods. This was in the early 2000s, and she did talk therapy, but she also did EMDR, which now is pretty mainstream. but I was so numb that that EMDR I couldn't really do at the beginning because I was so shut down. So I did another therapy called neuro emotional technique, or NET. That saved my life. She also did some craniosacral and some other things, but NET was so effective for me. And again, I said I was an engineer, and so I like to know how things work, and I couldn't explain how NET was working. So I just decided I didn't need to know how it was working because it is working. So the therapist that I was going to, she didn't take my insurance, and I'm the kind of person that I find something that's working for me, I just wanted to, hit it hard and rip the Band-Aid off and get through it. So I was starting to go to her twice a week, and she's like, well, you can go get NET with this other therapist. She takes your insurance. So what did I do? I went to the insurance person once a week, and I went to my therapist once a week, and I ramrodded this home. And then the other thing that they don't talk about is when you have such deep-seated trauma, that an hour-long therapy session is not enough. You need longer sessions because it might take you 40 minutes or 45 minutes just to feel comfortable. And then all of a sudden you're wrapping up your appointment. And so that's another thing that's kind of a problem with the system. But I for 2.5 years, I did this NET therapy twice a week. I had a couple, I call them my therapist called them intensives, where I had 4 or 8 hour long sessions. I mean, I spent a fortune on therapy, but at the same time, what else I did is I decided that I was going to work on my faith as well. I decided that I was going to figure out. I read this book it's called Believing Christ, and I know that not everybody is Christian, but for me, I am. And so this hit home for me is that a lot of people believe that Christ is who he is, believe that he did what he did, but they don't believe in what he promised he could do for you with the atonement, which is heal you, not just forgive you for your sins, but heal you from all pain. And so I decided, you know what? I need to believe Christ. I need to believe that he can do what he said he can do. And so I started to change my attitude and perspective, and I decided that I'm going to trust in God's plan for me. I'm going to learn how to apply the atonement to my life for healing while I was going through all this trauma therapy. And so my whole mind started to shift. And now I'm a super weirdo. And I look at all adversity as an opportunity for growth. Because in my mind, the whole purpose of life is so that we can learn and grow and become more like the Savior. Well, how are we supposed to learn patience or endurance or long-suffering or charity or empathy, compassion, all these characteristics, these God-like characteristics? How do you learn those things without having to overcome adversity? And so I stopped asking the natural question of why? Why is this happening to me? I accepted for myself that the answer to why was because I needed to learn something. So then I started saying, okay, God, what is it that I need to learn? And how do I use that to help myself and others? So what and how? Those are my questions now. And sometimes I learn the answers quickly, and sometimes it takes decades to learn the answers to those questions. But it's freed me so much. And what happened in my childhood is just a part of the adversity that I've faced in my life. I mean, the story continues, and so, but it was so freeing after this 2.5 years of this intensive therapy and this complete mindset shift in my faith and learning how to apply the atonement to myself. It was like I came out of my therapist's office one day. It was like all of a sudden I could feel spring. And I was happy and whole. It didn't mean it was the end of my adversity. It just meant that I had a different view of what it meant. And so when I first started in college, and I would be so depressed and upset, and the therapist would say, well, like my dad would do something because he was still manipulating me even from prison. He would do something and I'd say, oh, well, he makes me so angry. My therapist would say, well, nobody can make you feel. You choose how you feel. Well, that used to piss me off to no avail. I'm like, are you serious? My dad murdering my mother doesn't make me sad. But now I know what she's talking about is that we choose how we're going to respond. That's the only thing we can control is our own choices in our response, and the fact that I also have this belief that all adversity actually can be good for you. But before I came to that conclusion, I also realized that, God is just and merciful. And so if you've ever been to a courthouse, there's Lady Justice out in front. She's blindfolded, and she's got a scale in her hand. And the only way for justice to be served is if that scale is balanced. So I looked at it this way. If on the right side of that scale, there was nothing but hurt, pain, sorrow, misery, etc., 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 crap piled up on the right-hand side of that scale, eventually, in order for that scale and for justice to be served, that scale had to be balanced. Well, how is sorrow and pain balanced in the grand scheme of things with peace, joy, happiness, and the opposite emotions? So I held on to that belief for a long time, saying, okay, Heavenly Father, if this balanced scale is so out of whack, I trust you that at some point in my existence, whether it be in this life or the next life, that scale will be balanced. So now I'm like, okay, you're going to add another brick to the left-hand side, and that means I get another brick on the right-hand side eventually. Bring it on. So that's how I look at things now.
Awesome.
Like I said, super weirdo.
That's not weird. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to look at things. Ladies, we are just under the hour. I told you, Shelly, it was going to go fast. We are just under the hour. So I just want to give you both just a couple minutes just for any final comments. So I would ask you, Jen, first for your final words for the evening.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you, Shelly, for your openness, your vulnerability. It's not easy to tell this story. From experience, I know it's not easy to talk about your own trauma, but what you went through, no one should ever have to experience what you experienced. But your dedication to talking about it and being open about it is really helpful and lovely, because you said you hope that you're helping people, and I truly think you are. I think that there's no way that you couldn't be at this point. as I read your story, as I'm listening to you talk, I just keep thinking about escalation and how, being in advocacy and hearing over and over again, people deny how bad things can get and how bad things can be, wanting to downplay it because it is a cycle and it's not bad all the time. I just want to put it out there, and I want to encourage people that escalation is real. It does happen. And, don't think that somebody isn't capable of hurting you or hurting your family. Don't think that escalation isn't possible. It's very much part of the equation in domestic violence. And if you have the opportunity to get out and to leave, please do so. And please use the resources that we put out here on Suffering in Silence. Use the resources that are in your community. Just please value the life that you have and get out if you can, because truly there is hope on the other side.
Yes. Thank you. Shelly, what would you leave our listeners with for the night?
Well, my hope is that people understand that there's places that you can go and there's resources. There's people you can connect with. Use the modern technology of Facebook groups and domestic violence hotlines and everything to help you. I do have resources on my website too, which is beautifulashesmemoir.com, for domestic violence and sexual assault and alcoholism. And so if you're looking for a place I have a bunch of resources on there too. Don't suffer in silence. Don't think there's no way out. Don't hide because you're ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of. And it is not easy. Anybody who has been in this situation knows it's not easy. And no one who really understands is going to judge you. And I love people, and I'm just trying to help people. And seriously, if anybody wants to talk to me, or especially if you're a teenager or a child and you're in this, follow me on Facebook, PM me. I will talk to anybody. I just want to help as many people as possible know that there's more to it. You can survive these things. You can start over. You can heal from all of this trauma. Do not let it define you. Let it build you. Let it be the exercise of your character and spirit to elevate yourself to the next level. Learn something from what you are experiencing, and you learn to apply those things for good. Like, I know that one of the gifts that I have received from all of this trauma is the gift of empathy, the gift of understanding,
Yes.
the gift of compassion. And so these are beautiful gifts that I can use, that I wouldn't have as deep of an understanding of those things if I hadn't experienced. So there are purposes in even suffering. So my hope is that there's hope.
Thank you, Shelly. Thank you so much for being with us on tonight and for sharing your story. Love Bay, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from our program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We thank you for joining Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Love Bay family, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Good evening.